You know when you win that medal feel and you want to just hold on to it all the time.
That's pretty cool. Nice.
Oh, awesome. You can hear yourself all good?
Yep, you can hear you, can hear me, all good.
Oh, beautiful. The other day, Bruno Pano came through the academy at Gracie Ataman. So we had a chance to train with him, and it was just really cool. Just the stories of how jiu-jitsu developed in Australia. And you're a great person to ask because you were there.
I was there for a large part of it. I'm sure those who know who I am would be aware I'm a pioneer of Australian Jiu-Jitsu and MMA here. So it was a long time ago, but it's still like fresh in my memory because I'm very passionate about Jiu-Jitsu and MMA. So it's stuck with me for years. I started a little bit after the sport had come into the country. I'd heard about the sport through a magazine called Blitz, which was owned by John Will at the time. So he was using that magazine to kind of travel around the world and experience different martial arts. So he'd gone to the Philippines, competed in Salat World Championships. I believe he won the Salat World Championship for his weight. He ended up going to the wrestling pits of India over there, and he was just doing different martial arts. And then a Brazilian came over named Pedro. He put out a challenge, the old Gracie-style challenge, $50,000, put it up, winner takes all. So John Will is like, well, you know what?
Hey, we interrupt that story and we'll get back to it in a minute to let you guys know that this episode is powered by loanoptions.ai. Loanoptions.ai is Australia's first artificial intelligent loan marketplace for personal, business, and car loans. Their AI tool will see you matched with the right lenders in minutes. And more importantly, they don't just palm you off like Scott Morrison has done during these floods. They'll actually walk alongside you and make sure that the loan you want gets facilitated. With over 250 five-star reviews, there's a reason why people choose to go with Loan Options and why we back them. They back us. They're good people. We definitely recommend you choose loanoptions.ai. So go to loanoptions.ai/58. That's loanoptions.ai/FIVE, the number 8, and secure your loan today. Now, let's get back to the episode.
I'm keen. This is interesting. I might have to look into it. So instead of just diving in, he's the sort of person that will go out and do a bit of research. So he traveled to Brazil to kind of find out what this Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was and who this guy was. And he ended up going to Gracie Barra. He trained there for a while. And while training there, he met the Machado brothers. But he learned very quickly that it was not going to be a wise challenge to take up. Like he put up 50,000, he puts up 50,000 and winner takes all. And he's like, okay, got slapped around by, I think he said a 16-year-old or something. And he learned very quickly that this was something he wanted to learn. So he then brought back jiu-jitsu to Australia, started teaching it at his academy, and the students there were like, wow, this is fantastic. So he then took another trip over and brought some of his students with him to Gracie Barra, one of them being Peter DeBean, who eventually opened and ran the AFBJJ. They kind of kept moving forward. So John is one of what's known as the Dirty Dozen, one of the first 12 non-Brazilian black belts in the world. So that's pretty cool. So he'd been doing that for quite a few years. When I discovered it, so I was reading his articles. So he'd kind of been doing it, started reading the articles, and I'm like, wow, this is really cool. And then I'm just trying to think, one of my first job that I got coming outside of uni, I worked for what was then ADAB that became AusAid. It's a government department, and there was an old friend of mine who I knew at high school but had kind of lost touch with at college and then into university.
Yeah.
and he was there, and he brings me this VHS tape. I'm not sure if all the listeners know what that is. It's a rectangular tape that you put in this box that does the job of a DVD.
Time with technology is moving so fast, and I think we skipped the small disc. I think at one stage there was
disc,
a little later.
They kind of ditched. And, I mean, you tell people about the VHS beta battles, and it's like, what are you talking about? But anyway, so he gave me the tape of UFC 2, and I'm like, holy, this is awesome. Like, I wanted to try this. And then obviously with the John Will article, so I started looking for a place to train. I found a place in Sydney.
You weren't training it?
I'd started doing I'd been training martial arts up until I went to university, and then I stopped.
Yeah.
During university, I took up volleyball, and eventually got into beach volleyball, became a pro beach volleyball player, so was traveling up to Sydney to compete in pro beach volleyball.
Oh, amazing.
And then I met a girl, and then found a reason to move up to Sydney, and that's where I discovered Anthony Lange, who was under John Will as part of my journey. But while I was in Canberra, I started looking for anywhere that might teach jiu-jitsu, and the closest I found was a Jun Fan school, which is the pre-Jeet Kune Do Bruce Lee style. So they did Kali stick work, stick and knife work. They did Muay Thai for your striking, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but again, very simple Jiu-Jitsu, kind of to incorporate the three elements of, striking, grappling, and weapons, which was the kind of Jun Fan Jeet Kune Do way back in the day. So I'm like, at least I'm getting some grappling. Started competing again because as a younger kid, I'd competed in judo a lot and gave up judo for taekwondo because I wanted to be like Bruce Lee. So I wanted to be able to do jumping kicks and all the fancy stuff, and then stopped that going into uni. Well, anyway, so I decided I wanted to give this a go, ended up moving to Sydney, found Anthony Lange and started training with him. Competed in my first tournament after 2 weeks of training, and I got bronze. I got bronze in it somehow because I used the judo I knew, but obviously didn't have a great understanding of jiu-jitsu. I lost, I think, my match into the finals, my semis, to a judo black belt who was competing in it, and I think he ended up losing to a jiu-jitsu blue belt at the time or something like that. Yeah. But there was this I lost the bronze medal match. That's right. And I lost it to a wrestler. And there was this photo of me, someone took of me pinned underneath the wrestler. And I'd done judo for years and I knew how to stay safe, but hadn't really worked escapes and to the same degrees we kind of have in jiu-jitsu, because you're used to referee stoppages if you can kind of get out and things like that. And that kind of sat on my bedside for 12 months or over 12 months until I managed to get a rematch and beat him.
Oh, so you held onto the picture.
I literally put it on my bedside and I love that. And said, I'm not getting rid of it until I beat him. Which was crazy because it was like my first ever comp. I shouldn't have been in jiu-jitsu grappling, but I was just driven. Like I really enjoyed the sport. I just wanted to get better, and like I even had losses after that, but that one was the one I had to get back. And thankfully I did. 12 months later I did a special match I think in a boxing ring for Father Dave, who we'll probably have a chat about a bit later on as we move in. Yeah. He does a fantastic job helping the community, street kids and things like that. So he used to run events to raise money for it. So competed in that one. Well, anyway, kept training and did it for a few years. I ended up fighting MMA overseas and in Australia, the first ever Australian event in 1990, March 4th, I think it was, March 22, 1997.
Is that cage combat?
Yes. So it was called the Australasian UFC when they advertised for it.
Yeah.
And the promoter was an American who'd come over here. But then legal action was taken from the actual UFC. So when he released the VHS, it got rebranded to Cage Combat. Mm-hmm. So I fought in that, and I did a couple of other events. And several years later, I think around the 2000s, that's when you're talking about the original Brazilian black belts. They came over. So they were the first Brazilian black belt, Paulo, Bruno, Marcelo. And we'd already had an association, the New South Wales Submission Grappling Association, where we were running competitions and things like that. But it wasn't officially jiu-jitsu. We were doing jiu-jitsu rules and stuff, and the Brazilians came over. They set up the New South Wales Federation, and that's kind of where the sport then continued to grow. We ended up working with them.
How was that initial entry? So it was, I guess, initially, the challenge occurred, the 50,000, as you mentioned, and then I guess jiu-jitsu.
Interestingly, no one took it up. The challenge was made. No one ended up taking it up.
Why do you think that is? 50 grand is a lot of cash.
Well, I think it's you've got to put up the 52.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's like, even if you were confident, not everyone's going to have 50 grand to put up.
But it's interesting. It's interesting because we, in Australia, we had martial arts, and then this Brazilian comes in and I understand that they went, and definitely a good idea for no one to take that up.
I don't even know if anyone in the US took that up, because I think that challenge went across. I just don't think it's a cultural thing.
Yeah.
Fighting for money in that kind of way, if it's not an event, I don't think it's just the sort of thing an Australian fighter would do. If there was a big event, maybe they would enter. Interestingly enough, the first Australasian UFC event, which became Cage Combat, that I competed in.
Yeah.
When I heard about it, I'm like, I want to enter. And so I emailed the promoter. I'm like, I want to do it. And he's like, look, you've got some. So I hadn't really won an event or anything like that at that point. I've entered competitions. I had bronzes and silvers, and I may have had a gold in there as well, but not really. I wasn't a well-known credentialed fighter. I'd won some national all-styles, point fighting and continuous fighting competitions, and then my medals when I was a kid in judo. But I was essentially a nobody, even in the martial arts community. And he's like, look, we've got all these professional fighters. We've got kickboxers and wrestlers and different people coming in to do the sport. And I literally called him every day to see, how's it going? Has anyone dropped out? And what slowly happened is a lot of these fighters started looking into what this caged fighting was, this UFC, and they just all slowly started dropping out one by one. Until literally 2 weeks before the event, I'm called him up. I'm like, how's it going? Have you got enough fighters? And he's like, oh, no, I called him up that day, and he's like, no, we've got enough fighters. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then later that afternoon, I get a call back, and he's like, oh.
They all dropped off.
He goes, because they actually contacted another Australian athlete named Neil Bodycott, and they're like, oh, do you want the spot? And he's like, no, I want to stay in the alternate role. He would rather, because he thought it was an easier route. If you win the alternate match, then you have the opportunity to jump in at a later part in the tournament if someone gets injured, because back in the day, it was tournament, so you had
an 8-man tournament.
8-man tournament with alternate match.
Yeah.
So, and he called me. He goes, "Oh, everyone's turned it down." I'm like, "Do you want it?" And I'm like, "I've been calling you every day for 2 months. Of course I want it. Put me in." So I got put in, and the funny thing is right before the event, the alternate match got canned because they only had one pair of alternates to fight. And then Zane Fraser, literally the day before, was jogging on Bondi Beach and popped his Achilles tendon. It was just a random accident. And so, we need a spot, and they called Neil up and said, look, one of you two is going to get it, whoever takes it. And Neil's like, okay, I'll take it. And he ended up fighting in the tournament as well. So I ended up fighting in that tournament, which was an amazing experience. And now, for me at the time, it was only ever meant to be one match. Or not one, sorry, one event.
Yeah.
I'd been doing martial arts for years. I'd done, as I mentioned earlier, judo, taekwondo, had discovered Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and was kind of playing with that and enjoying it. I think I was, back then, I was a green belt, which was the equivalent of a 4-stripe white belt. So John Will brought in the coloured belts that they used for the kids, because at the time there was no stripe system for belts. It was just literally blue, purple, brown, back. And so what he did is he wanted to kind of incorporate more steps to that blue belt, because we weren't accustomed to waiting 2 years for your first reward, sort of thing. That's what your blue belt's your first reward. And so he saw that they had a junior belt system, so he used it for the adults.
Right.
And so he put the first four, what are now the first four stripes were, I think, yellow, orange, red and green, I think he used at the time, or something like that, like four belts before blue belt. So he started the stripe system. And then what he added on was now after the blue belt, you then got stripes on your belt. So if you were now blue belt, you got 3 stripes because there was 3 belts to black belt. Then when you got purple belt, there's only 2 stripes because you're 2 belts away. And then when you're brown belt, there was 1 stripe. So he actually put this ranking system, grading system in place long before the IBJJF ever incorporated it. He ended up changing it to match it, so 4 stripes on each belt, but there was no stripe system or anything like that back in the day. It was just your belts.
That's incredible. So that's sort of, I never knew that. That's sort of where it's all like.
Well, look, I don't think that necessarily where the IBJJF got the idea, but he was definitely one of the pioneers in doing it. And it was the same thing when he first started teaching jiu-jitsu. He taught it with Muay Thai and with wrestling, and he had a system called shoot fighting, which is today's MMA. So back then there was no MMA. There was no holds barred fighting, but that was style versus style. So he actually incorporated a system for integrating the different styles, and everyone back in the day said, you know, you're an idiot, you shouldn't be doing it. You know, you're mixing the styles, that you're making it impure. And that, I think that was one of the reasons Peter DeBean separated, because he just wanted to focus on jiu-jitsu. He wasn't interested in the striking or the wrestling. He just wanted to do jiu-jitsu. But you kind of look back now, and even though John mainly focuses on jiu-jitsu nowadays, Machado Jiu-Jitsu is a Machado Academy, it is interesting that he was pioneering MMA before there was MMA. So it is Australia really were leaders and realistically unrecognized leaders of the sport here. So, you know, we have had that idea for a long time.
Did you always think, you know, whilst you were doing volleyball, that you'd come back into fighting?
Fighting was more for personal growth, you know, improving confidence, getting fit. I enjoyed it. I was competing. I've always had a drive to compete and to excel. Like when I was younger in primary school, I played soccer, but I pretty much sucked at it. I'll be honest. I enjoyed it. And I played on the team, and because I wasn't good, I gave it up because I didn't want to do something that I couldn't really do well at. So you'll probably soon discover I'm obsessive compulsive. When I do things, I really dive deep. I don't take things by half, and I think I've kind of carried that on from when I was younger, but it's evolved a lot more as I've gotten older. So yeah, no, I think I was always very competitive. I believe in a positive way. It was never negative. It was never forced upon me. It was just something I always wanted to do. I just wanted to be better than I was. So yeah, as I said, just kept driving through. John Will was fantastic. And even the first time the Brazilians held a comp with brown and black belts, I was a brown belt at the time, and I'm like, I've got to compete in it. So I'm like,
is there any bit of you that is like has that complete? Because I see a comp coming up, and I'm like, yeah, like I want to compete in it, but then there's always that little voice in the back of my head, like, I don't know. I don't know if I should go in, but then I go in it, and you know, I'm loving it in the moment. But do you have that I don't know, or no, it's always
I've never had doubt about doing stuff. I think I was probably overmotivated. I would dive in when I probably shouldn't have a lot of times. Right. I just love the challenge. Don't get me wrong. Like when I started fighting, there were, you know, lead up to fights, fight day, I'd get the butterflies, nerves. I'm like, and I'd think to myself, why am I doing this? What the hell have I done? Because of the nerves, you know, the pre-fight nerves. But then I used to sit there and go, you know, no, it's good. Nerves are good. It's just your body getting ready. Don't let it get into your head and things like that. It was never always a smooth journey, but it was always one that I was driven to do. So, but yeah, I ended up competing in that first comp, and I think there was, again, I had to win because it was kind of the Australian Jiu-Jitsu players versus the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu players. Now, the two Australians, we were both brown belt. There was a couple of us, but there was a couple of us we were just brown belts. We hadn't got to black belt. I don't think there was any Australian made black belts yet. So obviously John Will and Peter Bean, who had got it from overseas, but there had been none that had kind of got their belts and developed in Australia only. So we had the Brazilians come over. They were black belts and they were kind of competing. So it was almost a pride thing because, there was rumors going around where, some people were saying, if you're not a Brazilian black belt or you're not Brazilian, you can't teach real jiu-jitsu. And obviously that gets back to us and we hear that and I'm like, jiu-jitsu is jiu-jitsu. It all comes down to who does it better. And so I was really motivated to win that one. And I did. I won every match via submission, so which was pretty cool. And I have to give credit to Polo, who competed in it. So he competed in it. And, I mean, he could have easily stood aside on his laurels and not competed. He got in there. And it was also Guga, who's with Gracie Baja. He competed. And I give even more credit to him because he was like 65 kilos and I was 95. So, and he still got in there. I mean, he won his first match against the bigger opponent. So he was definitely very skilled, had great jiu-jitsu. I was just equally as skilled and I was bigger and stronger as well. Like, I'm not going to say I was better. I believe I was, but I'm going to give him the credit. He had the skills to hang with me, and I'm sure he would have been a lot more competitive if we'd been closer in size. So I ended winning that, and that was a big feather in my cap. It was almost like it just validated what we were doing because that was a big thing. A lot of people, not a lot of people, but some people saying that we're not as good, and to be able to prove that we are. And even today, it really shows that we have some of the greatest grapplers in the world, both in the gi and out of the gi, coming out of Australia. Because one of the things that really irked me with the people that were saying you can't learn jiu-jitsu from a non-Brazilian, it's going to be good, is discrediting their own students who aren't Brazilian. Because if you make your own black belt and they're not Brazilian, you're saying you shouldn't learn jiu-jitsu from a non-Brazilian, you're discrediting what you're doing.
Yeah.
So, and that, as I said, that really irked me. And that was part of what drove me to prove that jiu-jitsu is jiu-jitsu. Like, I know we have lots of, even today, Baja, Humata, Oceana, the Machados. And in the end, we're all learning jiu-jitsu. We're all just as passionate about it. And it's kind of funny how in your town, it's very secular and competitive. But as soon as you travel, it doesn't matter what academy you belong to, your family, because you do jiu-jitsu. And I think that gets lost a little bit in the local community because they're so concerned about their own reputation. I don't want you training with them. I don't want you training over there. I don't want you doing this. Whereas I believe you can share and train because your students are going to remain loyal as long as you're doing jiu-jitsu and as long as you provide what they want, and that's the skills and more importantly in the environment, whether it's the competition environment, the social environment, or just somewhere where they can get away from it all. As long as you provide it, your students will remain loyal. You don't need to protect that. And I think back in the day, they were worried that they had to protect it. They had to prevent losing students, where I was very early on. I'm like, I don't need to protect it. I just need to be the best at what I do.
I feel jiu-jitsu is a language itself. Like, you can go anywhere in the world and you can just, show up to a gym. Even if you don't speak their language, you can go for a role and you get an understanding, which is a beautiful thing. And those comps, what was the submissions that you ended up pulling?
So the first one was arm triangle. Back then we call it head and arm choke. I picked it up from Mount. Which was with Polo, and then in the final it was and arm bar, and it was a what we call clamp arm bar, S-mount arm bar from the mount. And again, bigger guy, I was able to really get it. And thankfully, I'm not the sort of person to crank it. I'll put it on and hold, and he respectfully tapped. So that was really cool. But yeah, it's funny. I was known for triangles for a very long time because I was just really good at triangles. But I actually won most of my matches with all my MMA matches are arm bars. I love arm bars. I'm very good at arm bars, and even my triangles, when they defend that, I transition into the arm bars off there. So it's just kind of interesting. The people that I train with, probably because in training, everyone knew I was good at arm bars, so when they defended, I always got the triangle. So I got known for being good at triangles, but it was never because I was good at triangles or wanted triangles, because I wanted the arm bar, and my training partners knew I was good at arm bars. So they're like defending that, and that just gave me triangles. So it's kind of funny how that kind of evolves. Also, interestingly, as we're aware, leg locks, heel hooks.
I was about to get into the development of, that was where I was going with that. Your thoughts on the development of jiu-jitsu itself, where
one of the things I always really loved about jiu-jitsu compared to a lot of the other martial arts is that it constantly evolved. It doesn't stagnate. We don't do something just because my instructor showed me how to do it. We do it because it works. And back in the day, as I said, we used to watch the events on VHS, and there was a big community called the tape trading community. So these were people that were passionate about the sport because we had no internet, we had no YouTube, we had no Foxtel, we didn't have any access.
Is this like the like sort of like baseball trading cards or Pokemon trading cards where you trade VHS?
Yes. So what we used to do is you would buy a VHS instructional. So you get something that you didn't think anyone had, or there weren't many, and then you would make copies of it. And then you would talk to people online through, chat groups that were like mailing list groups or notice boards, and you chat to people overseas, and they'd go, "Oh yeah, I've got this. Oh, I really want to see that event because I can't see UFC over here. I'll send you this instructional if you send me a copy of the event." And they're like, "Yeah, cool." And so you tape trade. And then I'd find someone else, and they've gone, "Oh, I've got this Pedro Sauer jiu-jitsu video," and I'll go, "Oh, I've got this Sambo video. Are you interested in leg locks?" "Yeah, sure. Okay, I'll try." And then your collection grew. And I literally, when I moved house out to where I live now, I literally had boxes of VHS tapes, which likely I couldn't use anymore because they would have deteriorated, of tapes that I had spent years trading. And they were old UFC events, Pride events, EFC events, and then instructional videos on Sambo and jiu-jitsu and freestyle wrestling. But anyway, one of the things I picked up very early is I liked leg locks because no one really knew them. So I'm like, I'm going to add this to my game. And it was very frowned upon by the Brazilian community, and even in my own gym.
Why was it frowned upon? I want to get back to that thought, but why do you think at the time it was so it was pretty much, everyone looked,
I'll be honest, it's probably because they weren't good at it. They didn't understand it. It wasn't part of it. But it was the way they termed it was cheap. It's a cheap win.
Right.
You only leg lock because you can't pass the guard. Or you're going to hurt someone, they're dangerous. So there was different reasons, and honestly, I just think it was because they weren't good at them. And I'm like, oh no, I like them. These are good, and I can pull them off. And I even got a nickname for a little while called leg humper. You're humping my leg again. And I'm like, you tapped, didn't you? What do I care? And so, and again, this is one of the cool things about back in the day, which we don't really do today, is there was a lot of mat trash.
Yeah.
So we would trash talk each other and make fun of each other and give each other nicknames, but it was all good natured. But because the communities were much smaller, you knew people a lot more. The classes were, like a dozen people, things like that. They're like our 6 a.m. classes now, But yeah, so it was a lot of trash, and I got called leg humper for a while, and I'm like, I don't care, I'm taking your leg home. So
was there a lot of transitions and or has that game you've seen that develop a lot over time?
Well, the funny thing is, I was working on my own transitions, and I had I'd use some wrestling moves which I'd seen to roll, which like rollovers to roll into leg locks, and when someone leg locks me, I'd roll out into another leg lock. So I was getting into it, and it kind of kills me now because I could really be the father of leg locks. But I pretty much stopped doing them because none of the comps allowed them. The only place I could use it was MMA. So I'd had the MMA fight back in 97, and I had another one in 98. And then I tried to get fights overseas. There was nothing else happening in Australia. I had another event lined up for Queensland, which was the same cage combat. I was actually supposed to fight Tom Erickson, who's a 300-pound wrestler, MMA guy. And I'm like, yeah, I'll do it. So I'd signed to fight it and everything.
Mentality. I love it.
And it ended up being, the event got canned, and I mean, thankfully for my health, probably. But yeah, so there was no MMA events happening, and so I was doing leg locks and I just couldn't use them. So I pretty much just stopped doing leg locks, and because I had come from a judo background, I'd always played on top. So I was mainly the passing guard because no one could take me down in the gym. And then one day I was kind of thinking, because I'd watch a UFC, going, well, what happens if I come up against a wrestler? I'm like, well, what am I going to do on my back? So I started playing guard. And dear God, was I horrible at it. It was just because I didn't need to use it. And so I started playing the guard game, and I got really good, and I actually started enjoying the guard game more. And I got known for my guard game, but I still have a very strong top game because that's what I started with developing. And thankfully, with my leg locks, I was quite, as I said, good at it. And I actually got to compete in the inaugural ADCC World Championships in 1998. So they'd announced the event, and they asked for nominations. And obviously, I've contacted them, nominated, and they go, no, we've got, world champions. And like I'd had an MMA fight, so I'd had a bit of a reputation. I wasn't just, no holds barred fighter. That's better than MMA, no holds barred. But they'd invited a lot of like jiu-jitsu world champions and judo world champions and wrestlers, and they're like, oh no, we've got a lot of big names coming. Same thing happened again. One by one, they dropped out, and then one day they're like, hey, we've got a spot for you. And I'm like, sign me up, send me over. And thankfully it was the Sheik, so it didn't cost you anything. They flew you over, looked after you. They were absolutely amazing experience. But I got to compete at the World Championships, and I won my first match by heel hook.
Right.
And I am the first person in ADCC history to win a match with a heel hook submissions. So I'm technically the father of submission, leg entanglements in submission wrestling.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Really?
So there were other. So when I went over there, I actually got to meet like Oleg Taktarov, who's a Sambo guy.
Yeah.
They obviously do leg locks. I met some other guys who did leg locks, and we traded ideas and stuff, but I pulled it off. I'm the one that got the first heel hook submission
in ADCC.
And thankfully I've got the video clip of it. I don't even know how I recorded it because it's terrible, grainy quality, but I've got it.
Oh, you got to send me that. I need to see that.
Yeah. So that was pretty cool. And again, and that's what kind of upsets me. I was even looking at when I fought Frank Shamrock in K1, he was known, he came from Pancrase. He was known for his leg locks. I almost heel hooked him and knee barred him. And I was using outside ashi, which was unheard of. Like, I think the original one I used what we would now refer to as a cross ashi. I think almost a saddle position. And then I was literally just a couple of days ago looking at some photos from someone brought something up on Twitter. They go, oh, and you fought Frank Shamrock. I'm like, oh yeah, cool. I'm going to send them a couple of photos from it. So I go back through my Facebook albums, which go, 20 years deep or whatever it is. And I found the photos from the that K1 match where I fought Frank Shamrock in MMA, and I'm like, oh, That's right. I had him mounted in that match. I'm playing outside Ash. Obviously, it wasn't outside Ash. It was just one of the positions I developed, but just hadn't named. And that was the one thing I think I wish I'd learnt from Eddie Bravo is naming positions, because it might be known as the Elvis
read
Ash.
my mind before. I was thinking Eddie just before, because he had an issue about even naming positions, right?
Yeah.
And
he didn't have the issue. The Brazilian community had the issue because he was naming stuff that was similar to what they were doing but different. And it's like, well, no, you can't call it that. This is what it is. And but he just did it for his own guys. And obviously it kind of gained that popularity. And he actually came out and did a seminar at our gym when he was a brown belt before he even
oh, really?
Yeah, before he even got famous. He showed us his lockdown stuff, and I think a little bit of rubber guard and things like that. So we got exposed to it early. But yeah, I just thought it was funny that when I look back and I'm like, I forgot about those leg locks in that MMA match. I almost because Frank went for the leg locks thinking I was clueless, because he hadn't seen the ADCC stuff or anything, because no internet, thank you very much. Sorry, they had an internet, no YouTube or Instagram or anywhere where you could have those videos floating around. And almost submitted him with it. And like, I've got a great photo of a knee bar, and he's like literally just trying to escape out of the position. He ended up winning the fight because of positional dominance. Like he did better, and but I think I got closer to actually finishing the match.
Yeah.
The big issue for me was, again, it was one of the fights I took on. I think this one was 10 days notice. So I wasn't really prepping, wasn't in fight shape. And it's kind of funny in the third round, at the end of the third round, I've gone to my coach. I go, I can't do this anymore. I'm just too tired. I haven't got it anywhere. I haven't got it in me. And he's like, what are you talking about? Shut up. He goes, have your drink. This is what you did. Go out there and beat him. And that was the round that I almost beat him with the submissions. And then the fifth round, I was wrecked. Like I was keeping up, but I was just surviving, and he ended up winning the match by decision. I have no idea because it was a 5-round match. Yeah, I have no idea how they scored it or whether they scored it, because obviously K1, whether they scored it as a whole, whether they scored it round by round, I really don't remember. But it's also what got me into the UFC.
Yeah, which I wanna get to, like fighting like legends like that. You know, there's Shamrock, one of the Shamrock brothers, and Tito as well.
Bisping,
you know, Bisping,
Forrest Griffin.
Yeah, Forrest, who's an absolute. Yeah, all of them are really absolute
Hanato
legends.
Babalu, Sobral again.
Yeah,
more old school guys would know. Jeremy Horn, and obviously Evan Tanner, who had that very interesting death, walking out into the desert and not coming back. And then, I got to face a lot of the big, again, and that was back in the time where to fly me over wasn't financially viable, to stick me on an undercard. So they're like, well, you're going to get these fights. And I'm like, well, they're the fights I want. I don't want to face the best guys, because I want to see how good I really am. I don't want the easy fights. Yeah. Again, not good for a career or your record. But, it was fun, and it's something I'll always remember.
Yeah. So. And from the Eddie Bravo coming over, is that where you got the go-go plata? Like I saw somewhere where you did one of the first go-go platas submissions.
So what's the submission I'm best at? What was I telling you earlier?
Armbar.
So I went for an armbar, and when they defended, I did a move where I dropped my shin over the front and came in and then grabbed the head, and we referred to it as a shin. I referred to it as a shin choke, but it was a counter off an armbar setup.
Right,
and
gotcha.
So it later on became known as the go-go, and obviously it used to come off omoplatas and things like that, and there were different setups, but mine was off an armbar, and I actually did it in 98 when I fought in rings against Kiyoshi Tamura, who was the number one guy for rings. So I got brought in to lose to him. And again, 2 weeks notice, short notice. And it was a 30-minute match, not rounds. It was a 30-minute match. That's it. And like I wasn't fit for it. I just went, I don't care. And I ended up losing at the 10-minute mark. I pretty happy that I did 10 minutes. And I had him a couple of times. I almost had him leg locked because, I mean, they're very good at leg locks. And I had counters and he went for a leg lock and I did a move I call a cross ankle lock, and I think it's called a shoelace lock or something now from the 50-50 position. And I should have had the match won, but when I did this submission, at the time it didn't register. We were wearing shin pads. So it's a cross ankle where ankles cross and then you come underneath and you crank, and I push one ankle or my shin into the ankle, and it can break an ankle. But with the shin pads in place, it stopped it from being able to break. Like, it was painful and uncomfortable, but I wouldn't be able to break the ankle. And so he then ended up heel hooking me on my leg as it came across. He ended up dragging it across, picking it up. And because I had rope escapes, I was able to kind of get out and the match kept going. But because he actually popped the ligament or tendon, I ended up switching stance. So I went from orthodox, which I was, to southpaw for the rest of the match. And then when Frank watched it, he thought I was a southpaw. So he came in unprepared for our fight because again, not much footage out there sort of thing. But yeah, at the start of that match, I got the Goga Plata on him. It was off a guard pass into an arm bar. He defended the arm bar. I switched into the shin choke, and he ended up doing a rope escape. I think if he touched the ropes, then I think he reached with his foot, then they stopped the match and restarted. So he did the first rope escape. So had it been win by submission, I would have won the match. But obviously with your rope escapes, then he got me. I ended up rope escaping. The match kept going, but my knee just kind of got worse and worse during the fight. And then I'm not even sure how it got to the ground. He ended up catching me, I think in an arm bar. It may have even just been a cross arm bar from side control or something like that. And I think it was more exhaustion at the time than anything. But yeah, so that's where I did the first ever Goga Plata in MMA. And again, it was just a shin choke. And I used to because we didn't have black belts around, my coach, Anthony Lange, was always just one belt ahead of me. I think he was a blue belt when I was fighting. I think John Will at the time when I started was a purple belt. We had to use the VHS tapes. We had to develop our own stuff. We had to make our own games. And then that's why I was, developing the leg lock game, then the arm bar game. And I come from an IT background, so most people might not know this, but I've got a degree in IT. I worked for 10 years in the industry. I've worked for companies like Microsoft, Qantas, Colonial Bank, PwC, Coopers & Lybrand. So some of the biggest companies, as well as government departments, even the Commonwealth DPP and things like that, doing IT. So I always had a very structured analytical approach. So I always applied that to my jiu-jitsu. I always wanted to have systems. So I always used to put systems and create systems in place, so it wasn't just relying on a single move. And the great thing was my coach, Anthony Lange, was much more philosophical. He goes, this is the idea of the position. I want you to understand it and kind of become it. And so I took my analytical approach, his philosophical approach, and I kind of combined it to kind of develop my game that's kind of come out now, which is very interesting, because when I met Danaher years and years later, I hosted him the first time he ever came to Australia. It was one of the first gyms to host him out here. A lot of people have said he's very difficult to talk to, but I'd had experience with people that kind of had that kind of introverted thing, and I got on with him very well. And I discovered very early he had a similar approach but came from the other direction. So he came from more of a philosophical background and applied a structured to it. So we'd kind of met in the middle, coming from the opposite direction. So I always found that very interesting. We had some great chats about that. But
both legends of the game, and it's amazing how many firsts that you have done for Australia and in general, and your tenacity to just go head first. You're going to say something?
I was going to say that also reminds me, because I'm sure people that have heard of the Dead Orchard. So
yes.
It's kind of the triangle double armbar, which is what I did with Jeremy Horn.
Yeah.
And it's funny because Danaher was telling me a story where he was teaching the move to someone. And one of this 10th planet person came up and goes, oh, you are studying 10th planet jiu-jitsu because you're teaching the dead Orchard. And he goes, no, I'm not. I'm teaching the dead Elvis. And the guy goes, what are you talking about? And he goes, Nathan Orchard didn't come up with the event. Elvis Sinosic did. He did it in the UFC back in UFC 30 because, he's an encyclopedia and he knew it. He knew because obviously he comes from New Zealand. His mother was in Australia. So he was aware of, he goes, you need to go and learn your jiu-jitsu and MMA history. And the guy was a little bit shocked and ran off. And he told me the story and I'm like, cool. So I'm going to, whenever my students do, I go, you got to call it the dead Elvis.
I love that. And it brings us straight into UFC. How did that come about? How did you end up, signing with them, and what it was back then to, what it's grown into now is something amazing. But what it was back then, it was sort of, a little unknown.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, thankfully, it's the reason why pro wrestling is so popular is because there's a story behind it. Yeah. So there is a good story with this one. As I mentioned, I'd fought Frank Shamrock in the K1. I went the distance. I lost, but I almost beat him. And so, that started getting around, who's this Elvis guy and all this sort of stuff. I'd met Joe Silva, who was kind of working with the promoter of the UFC while it was, the matchmaker of the UFC when it was under SEG. Mm-hmm. So I'd met him on a mailing list called the Combat Mailing List, and we'd been chatting. And
you met him on a mailing list?
On a mailing list. This is back in the day where you would
what?
It was really hard. Like there were no forums or anything like that. There was like notice boards, and this was a mailing list where you would email into this particular email address, and then it would go out to everyone on the list. So you'd send the email in and everyone would get it. And if anyone replied, they'd go back to this and then it would go out to everyone. So you'd be literally, it's almost like Twitter on email. It was crazy. Now, my problem always is my time zone was different. So they had what was called a combat list digest. So at the end of the day, you got everything that everyone had discussed during the day. So I'd be in at work, going through my combat list, finding, I'm like, this is interesting, reply to it. And then my replies would go in and then they'd go out to everyone and no one would read them until the next day because most of the people were in the US. I was one of the few people. And there was a few people in Canada, and I also made a connection in Canada. So I ended up fighting in Canada for the UCC world title, which I rightfully should have right now. Maybe I'll go into that story in a second. And I again met the promoter on that mailing list. Anyway, so I'd met Joe, and then I had that fight with Frank, and then SEG was bought out by Zuffa. So when they bought out, they got rid of the matchmaker because he was a bit controversial and he was difficult to work with, and so they brought. Joe Silva was already part of the company when they purchased it, and they moved him into the role because he was already working with him. Now, Joe is, a lot of people may not realize, was super passionate about MMA. He had a deep knowledge. He followed all the Shudo. He followed the hook and shoot throughout the US, which was some of the events. He followed the Pancras and the rings. He knew everything about what was going on and was watching a lot of those events. So when he started matchmaking, he already had a very deep knowledge of MMA and the different promotions and the fighters out there. And as I said, met him on the mailing list. And so Jeremy Horn was supposed to fight a Brazilian black belt called Cafe Dante. Now, he was supposed to fight Jeremy, and the winner was supposed to fight Tito Ortiz because everyone had been talking for years about Jeremy. He'd fought some of the best guys in the world. He fought Antonio Nogueira, went to a decision, didn't get submitted, fought Anderson Silva, I think went to do a decision. I think he lost as well. But everyone knew it had something like 100 fights. So, in the smaller promotion, been fighting around, was a very big name, but everyone was like, he needs to fight Tito because he's grappling so good. And so they had this match, the number one contender match between him and Cafe Dante. And then Dante ended up getting a staph infection and a massive hole in his leg and had to pull out. 2 weeks before the fight, I get a phone call. And as you can imagine, I didn't turn it down.
Seems to be a red thread, and it's great.
The funny thing is, I got the phone call at like 4 o'clock in the morning. Hey, who's this? Joe? Joe who? Joe Silva. Oh, Joe, the mailing list. Yeah. Oh, do you want to fight Jeremy Horn in the UFC? Yeah, that would be awesome. Oh, look, it's 4 o'clock. I'm going to go to sleep. Just send me an email. And went back to sleep. Woke up the next morning.
You think you dreamt it?
Man, I had the best dream. I dreamt that I got this fight in the UFC, and I think I called some of my friends. I'm like, I had the most surreal dream. It was like it was real. Like I got this fight, and then I got into work, jumped on, going through my emails, checking the combat list, and I'm like, oh, Joe sent me a message. Oh, holy. I am fighting in the UFC, and then I had to call up my coach. I'm like, oh, hey coach, I've got to fight in the UFC. He's like, oh, when is it? 2 weeks. He's like,
2 weeks.
He goes, that's not really a lot of time. I'm like, He's like, all right. He goes, do you really want to take the risk? I'm like, because he knew I had the goal to get into there. And he's like, I'm like, yeah, no, I'm happy to do it. So obviously went over there. Now, a very interesting story to the match is, again, no real internet, no YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, any of that stuff. So there used to be this newspaper called Full Contact Fighter. Mm-hmm. So they would print it out and they would do basically what a news site would do is they would talk about upcoming matches. They would talk about previous match results. They would talk about training and just interviews of fighters and stuff. So we would get it, but it would always be a couple of months after it had been released. So we'd get them and it'd have predictions of the fights a month after the fight had already happened. But still, we got this paper, so it was pretty cool, Full Contact Fighter. So I'd never seen it before a show. And I get to the US. I'm fighting in this show in the Trump Taj Mahal. And someone goes, and I'm like, oh, is that a Full Contact Fighter? I go, I've never read one before a show. Do you mind? And he goes, yeah, you can have it. So the guy gave it to me. And in there, they had predictions for the main event, co-main event, and that sort of stuff. And I was the co-main with Tito fighting Evan Tanner. And, even with Evan Tito, it was a bit of a back and forth. Some people said Tito win, some would say Evan win. Some of the other fights, it was kind of mixed and stuff. Mine, it was every single person that there was a combination of coaches and fighters and reporters had predicted that I would lose the match in under 3 minutes by submission. And I'm reading this and some people may go, oh, that must be disheartening. I went, no. My goal was to beat him in under 3 minutes by submission. 2 minutes, 59 seconds, I got the tap.
What?
So, again, that's what I'm talking about. It's just who I am, and I kind of, and again, I'm getting the tingles because I'm remembering like that feeling when I read it. I'm like, they underestimate me. I'm not going to let that get to me.
I love that. Which
brings up another interesting bit is after I fought Frank in Japan, like before it, he was just like, wouldn't talk to me, wouldn't interact with me at all. I think he needs to separate that. And I'm like, hey, Frank, I'm a big fan. Like, I'm going to fight him. I'm like, I didn't care. I'm like, I think you're awesome. That's cool. But he was like, but after the fight, he was super cool. He came up to me, he goes, oh, that was an awesome fight, blah, blah, blah. He goes, look, what I do when I fight is I break people. He goes, I couldn't break you. He goes, that I push them and I get in and I break them. He goes, I couldn't break you. I'm like, oh, that's cool. Really? That's nice. He goes, I even did it to Jeremy. I just had to push until eventually I broke him. And he ended up beating Jeremy Horn by, I think back then it was like they were 15-minute matches. And in the 11-minute mark, he got a knee bar on Jeremy Horn. And that's why he was known as the leg lock guy because of the pancreas. But he said to me, he goes, look, if they ever offer you a fight with Jeremy Horn, he goes, don't take it. And I'm like, why? He goes, Jeremy is one of the best guys out there, but he doesn't get the recognition. He doesn't get the respect he deserves. And I'm like, oh, okay. because he fought so much. He had a lot of losses on his record, but it didn't reflect just how good he was and how well-rounded. He goes, if you beat him, nobody will care. If you lose to him, you'll have no career. And I'm like, okay. And then when I got off the match, that crossed my mind. I'm like, I don't care. I'm going to take it.
So you took it.
Oh yeah, took it. And as I said,
just 1 year out the other.
And that was the one, they said he was going to submit me in under 3 minutes, and I got him at 2 minutes, 59 seconds which
is amazing.
The dead Elvis.
Hey.
But a really interesting, another interesting part to that match is nowadays I do the finger point. So back in the day, fighters would hold a fist up when you did fan photos, or the Brazilian guys would do that. I can't remember what you call it. The Brazilian fist.
We always do this. I don't know. It's just embedded in our DNA that we just do this.
That's what we're doing. And I never had my own thing, but I'm sitting there right at the end of the match. I've won. You have no idea. There's just so much excitement. I'm tingling. I'm excited. I'm just waiting for my hand to be raised. Like, this is what I've been waiting for. I finally got into the UFC. I've won. I'm so excited. And I just look down, and there's this cameraman on his knees with his camera looking up at me. I look down the barrel of the camera, I kiss my finger, and I point straight down the camera and just stare straight down the camera. And then they put my hands up and call the match. And then the UFC saw that, like obviously it's their footage. And then after that, all their promo stuff that they used always finished with the finger point. So even when they launched their video game, they did this massive montage of slams and punches and kicks and knockouts and all sort of stuff, and then everyone getting their hand raised, all the different fighters, and then at the very end of it, the finger point. And then they did it for their ads. When I was fighting Tito, they did all this stuff, and then the finger point. And so after that, I just went, that's mine. I'm taking that finger point. So now when I do all the photos, it's the number one finger point. Again, which really paid off long term. It's good to have a little call sign, and again, I usually go, it's good to be the king.
I love it. And King's Academy, and talk about one. I want to come back to MMA for a bit, but earlier on you mentioned that in university you were going into a governmental sort of role.
Well, after university, once I graduated,
You wanted to go into a governmental role, or what was that about?
It was just a job. Like, I just was looking for work. There wasn't a lot of IT work once I graduated.
Yeah.
Government department had it. So as I said, that's where I started working for ADAB, which became rebranded as AUSA. That's my first job. But which also ties in. So after my first year of uni, I was doing IT. So I was doing basically information technology degree. And I did that because
by the way, were you doing all of these fights and all of it whilst working in IT?
Yes. My call sign was the world's toughest nerd for a little while. And when the UFC, like, I was in the first ever video game, and I actually made the manual as one of the main characters in there. And again, it's because the IT guys goes, he's one of us. And they even gave me a secret move that knocked everyone's power bar almost to the bottom. So,
I love that.
So yeah, that was pretty cool, because IT, they're IT, and we used to like when I was chatting to them when they were developing the game and stuff, because I had to do photos and measurements and ask what my moves were. So yeah, they put in all this cool stuff, because I did a couple of press things where the developers were there, and they're like,
that's my guy. That's my guy right there.
But anyway, so while I was doing my degree in IT, I got 12 months into it. I'd done my first year, and I did pretty well, a couple of distinctions, credits, and a couple of passes in there. And I kind of went, I don't know if I want to do this. I think I want to do coaching. And I sat down with my parents, and I'm like, look, I think I want to change to a sports coaching degree. My parents are like, look, you've started it, finish it. Once you graduate, then you can do it afterwards. You can, do a postgraduate degree or whatever it is that, mature age student degree, and you can do your coaching after, finish your IT. When you start something, you should finish it. And I'm like, well, no, that's fair. That's who I am. I was finishing. So I ended up doing my degree in IT, and then the same thing. I didn't end up, once I finished uni, I'm like, I don't want to go back to uni.
I hear you
so
there,
I ended
bro.
up working, but even in that first job at ADAB, this company came up, I think it was Acer at the time, and they had this software called Dragon Dictate, and they brought it to our department, because we're the IT department. They showed us how to use it because our goal was to integrate it into the rest of it, and it was more designed for people who have maybe RSI or injuries that they have difficulty typing. So it's a voice translation system into computer text. And so I learned it very quickly, and I actually started understanding it better than the people that were bringing it to me. So Asa comes up to me and goes, oh, look, we'd like to get you to come to a couple of seminars, functions, that sort of stuff, and then help share it. And I'm like, teach it. And I'm like, yeah, that's cool. And I started doing that, and I'm like, oh, I really enjoy the education part of it. And they actually offered me a job, and I'm like, yeah, absolutely, I'll take it, because it was more money, and it was going from government into, because I was a contractor, I didn't have the security anyway in my government department, so this was another contracting role, more money. So I checked with my boss. I told my boss about what was going on, because I would end up working with them anyway. And they said, that's cool. Sadly, Asa went bankrupt or something like that, and they shut down for a while. So I didn't get the job. And so I ended up going and working IT. As I said, spent 10 years in it. And what would you know is, like 10 years later, I would quit the IT, open up the first full-time MMA gym in Sydney, ended up doing a diploma in sports coaching. So I got there, I just ended up going the long way.
Have you had a sort of passion for any governmental role before at all?
No, not at all. I was never into politics. It's just never interested me. It's just not what I like people.
Yeah.
Obviously I love jiu-jitsu because it's a mental and physical challenge all in one, and it challenged me in a way that I just wanted to keep doing it. And I've been doing it for 27 years now. A 4th degree Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. Next year I get my 5th degree. So I've been doing it for a very long time. I love it. I love the teaching side of it. But a big part of what I love, and my gym is really about, is the community. I love the people. I love helping people, like the amount of young kids I've seen come through who've turned around from being shy, bullied kids, who've now built up their confidence, become world champion, junior world champions, become functioning adults in the community, and you see people grow, and even just the adults and the community we built. Like when I built my gym, I actually incorporated members areas. You don't make money of it. It was just about, I like having the people around. So I've got a mezzanine level. We've got chairs so people can watch. We've got what we call a members mat. We run no classes on it. It's purely for any of the students who aren't doing the class, or after their class they want to train, roll, drill, whatever, stretch out. We have a coffee area out the front, nice coffee machine, a couple of chairs and tables. The staff are always making coffee for each other, and sometimes the members and stuff. So it really is, like, I know some people talk about community and family, but it's very big to me. I probably have the best family rates in Sydney. I have something like between 40 to 60% off if you've got a parent and then the kids for each child and stuff, because I know how difficult it is for families sometimes. Jiu-jitsu is not a cheap sport, and I understand why. It's if you're running a proper gym, it's very expensive. You've got this full-time center, you've got employees. My staffing expense is like $30,000 a month. So it's not cheap, and if you want to provide great quality of service and great stuff, the sport isn't going to be cheap. It's just the way it is. But if I can give more value, so I put a sauna in, so my students have access to a sauna. We do ice baths. I installed a small gym. I don't charge anything for this. We added hot yoga classes and different things that I can give back to my students as well. I ended up purchasing a hyperbaric oxygen chamber Again, this was because of my experience over in the US, seeing altitude training, some of the advanced stuff these guys, and I actually got it initially for the fighters and competitors, and ended up going, not getting used a lot because woo-woo stuff, what am I going to get in the tube and fill it with pressure and oxygen, and what's it going to do? Or as most fighters are, they're strapped. They haven't got a lot of money. Even when I discount it and stuff like that, they're like, I don't want to spend that every week. I'd rather get food. So it wasn't getting used a lot. So I started advertising it outside the gym, started getting cancer patients, autistic kids, things like that. I even put out an offer because I wanted to help where if any child with cancer has it, they have free use of the oxygen chamber.
Amazing.
So I'm like, I would like to give back to the community. And this is one of the things that early on disillusioned me towards corporations and government departments and things like that, is I'm like, well, how do I get my message out? Like, I'm not charging for it. I want nothing for it. Obviously, I put some restrictions on. I can't give it to them every day, but, if they come in once or twice a week, I'm not going to charge them for it. If they want to do more, then I'll do a discount rate because I just got to make sure I have other people can use it and stuff. But I had this, I just wanted to help. So I contacted a couple of government health departments. I'm like, hey, I've got this hyperbaric oxygen chamber. If there are any kids, can you put me in touch with anyone? Oh, no, we don't do that sort of stuff. I'm like, look, I'm not charging for it. I'm not asking for you to promote me. I'm just like, pass it on. Who can even give me a list of contacts? He goes, they're like, no, we're not interested. He goes, contact some of the charities. I'm like, okay, well, fair enough. Charities will want to do this. They want to help. Contact the charities. No, we don't do this. Would you like to make a donation? I'm like, I'm offering free use. This is not just money. This is going to help their treatments. It's no charge. No, we don't do that. We just take money. I'm like, don't you run events? Have you got a newsletter? Can you pass it? Can you just let them know? No. And it wasn't just one, it was multiple ones. I contacted, I tried to find as many as I could, and it's just nothing, no traction. No one was interested in helping. I mean, that's all I wanted to do, and I get a little bit emotional about it because it is quite disappointing. And that's kind of
100%, and especially when you're doing that and you're trying to help kids with cancer and you're putting it all forward, it doesn't make sense why people wouldn't.
And it's disheartening too. So, and again, that's why I had no interest in working for governments. As I said, I worked for 10 years for governments and private industry, and it just wasn't the culture I liked. If I'd probably be making a mozza right now if I'd stayed in there and worked. I'd be somewhere up high, probably senior management up there somewhere, a director possibly in an IT department, and I'd be well off. But I don't think I would have been happy, and that's why I just ditched it all. I just when I had the opportunity, I just ditched it all. Just dive straight in. And when we first opened up a full-time gym, I had no income for 3 months or something like that. And even then when we got an income in, it was marginal. I built up massive debt. I didn't care. I was happy. I was doing stuff. And thankfully, I was able to pay it off, turn it all around, build the business I have, the empire as I call it now. So I have my King's Academy gym, UFC gym, and obviously I did the stint on Fox Sports where I was chief analyst on the Fight Week show. So I've got to do a lot of cool stuff. I've traveled the world. I've done a lot of things that I probably never would have done if I hadn't got into jiu-jitsu or MMA and the combat sports, and it's done wonders for me, and that's why I kind of keep going. And a big part of me of opening the UFC gym was I already had a super successful King's Academy. It's like doing great. Western Sydney, it's probably the go-to place. We have the biggest classes. We've got a massive academy, great reputation. A lot of people come just because someone told them about us. We've got great coaches. And as I said, the culture is good. I didn't need to open up a UFC gym. But, I mean, part of me did because I was the first Australian UFC fighter, first Australian to fight for a world title. I fought in the first ever event in London in the Royal Albert Hall, which never had an MMA event after that again, which was pretty amazing. First time they fought in Manchester. And so again, you know, I'd done a lot and I had a connection. I'd worked with Fox Sports doing the UFC show, and I've been to every single UFC event in Australia since they started coming, and thankfully the UFC have always looked after me and comped me tickets and stuff, and I've had some of the best tickets the industry could kind of give. And when the UFC gym franchise opened up, I wanted to be involved with it because obviously my history with the UFC, but more importantly, it brings jiu-jitsu and the martial arts to the wider community. A lot of people, when looking for fitness, might not consider the benefits of martial arts. Some parents might for kids, but, you know, it's martial arts. Sometimes goes, oh, it's that Bruce Lee stuff, you know, kung fu chops, judo chops, that sort of stuff. Whereas the UFC gym takes the fitness package, which everyone is familiar with.
And brand awareness.
Then creates a fitness class and then adds on martial arts fitness classes and the boxing. And I just wanted to be involved with that because it brings what has really turned my life around and many people I know through the martial arts to more people.
Yeah.
So I'm involved with it. And I'm not only have my own UFC gym, which I'm mortgaged to the gills on, but I also am the head of the UFC Gyms Australia BJJ program. So I oversee it all. I do the gradings and that sort of stuff. So, yeah.
And if for those listening that don't know, you know, like extremely high level to get to your position, and I'm extremely glad you didn't stick down the IT path because inadvertently,
or the beach volleyball path, it could have gone that way.
Inadvertently, you've impacted a lot of people. Like one of my comps was at your gym, and I'll always remember that comp like for the rest of my life. So it's impacted people that you don't even know, you might not see on your day to day, but it you know reaches quite a wide community. And I have a lot of respect, obviously, for people that do jiu-jitsu in general and black belts of your caliber. And it always intrigues me because jiu-jitsu, you sort of stay away from politics a bit, and you explaining it before shows your heart. And what made that switch? What made you want to dive into politics? Because right now you're the candidate for UOP for Blaxland.
For Blaxland, that's correct. Yeah.
And what made you make that leap into politics? Because essentially you could have stayed back and done the community.
Yep.
But what made you do that drive?
Well, yeah, it's an interesting story. Again, it kind of goes back to my drive, my obsessive compulsiveness. Obviously, my business is a big part of what kind of triggered it off is when they first shut everyone down. The first people to get shut down were gyms and fitness centers, martial arts schools. The last to open at the end of lockdown are us again. Now, prior to getting shut down, go back, quite a few years. I was supposed to fight in UFC 110. I blew my shoulder out, ended up having surgery, had to be out for 12 months, put on a lot of weight. And then just one day it was just like, I looked at a photo and I'm like, holy crap, I'm fat. What's happened? And what had basically happened is I was eating the same way as I was when I was training, but I wasn't training. And I just ended up putting on weight. It never changed. It never occurred. And I never really thought about nutrition. Nutrition was just fuel. I didn't eat particularly healthy. I ate like your pizza, your KFC, along with, and I had healthy meals and things like that as well, but I never really interested me. And then I got fat and I'm like, well, and then I kind of kept training and I was training hard. So I could hide it because I was a big guy, chest, shoulders, and it kind of, and I'm like, well, I'm training. I'm doing a lot of exercise. It's not like I've stopped exercising, but I'm still fat. So what's going on? Now, obviously, I'm not training as hard as I was when I was a fighter.
Mm-hmm.
But it just didn't make sense. And that's when I kind of dive into nutrition. I discovered intermittent fasting, which led me to low carb, which led me to keto, and now I play around with carnivore as well. But the reason I bring this up is, again,
which is my diet. Definitely support the carnivore diet and carnivore candy store. Go to them and
glad I could help with that promo piece. Send me some stuff, carnivore candy store. So the community I followed, so I started reading a lot of studies on nutrition and reading articles and following these people on podcasts, so listening to a lot of stuff. So I was diving deep into the nutrition sphere. And again, I mentioned the cancer side of thing as well.
Yeah.
So I had these cancer patients, so I was looking into nutrition for cancer because, again, for some reason the medical community has no interest in nutrition and socializing and outdoor activity and all these things which really play a big part in our health.
Yeah.
They stop becoming health practitioners, they become pharmacological practitioners.
Yeah.
They go, here, take this, take that. You know, I've heard stories where someone goes, I'm on carnivore, and they go, oh, you're going to kill yourself. You know, look how high your cholesterol is. And I'm like, but I've lost 20 pounds. I'm in the best shape of my life. My illness has faded away. Why do you want me to stop? And he goes, look, just do it. And he goes, but if I stop eating this way, I'm going to put my illness is going to come back. And they go, don't worry, we'll give you pills for that. I mean, that's literally their answer.
Yeah, there's the sickness industry versus the health industry.
Yeah, so I'm in the health industry. I want to create health. So when COVID hit, obviously I got shut down. Now the community I was following, which my podcasts and stuff like that, were into this, and because they discovered very early on that the comorbidity were lifestyle-based illnesses. So they knew very early into COVID, we already knew that comorbidities, obesity, insulin resistance, and various other things played a large part in those people who were dying or suffering severe injury from COVID. So suddenly I'm like, well, if we know this already, why are we shutting down fitness gyms? We should be an essential service. Why are we not open? And then why are the chief health officers giving pharmacological advice? Why are they not giving health advice? Why are they not telling you to get vitamin D? Like vitamin D, low vitamin D levels correlates very, very highly to adverse reactions and death if you get COVID.
Yeah.
High vitamin D levels is very protective. So why are we not recommending it? It's cheap. Vitamin D you can get anywhere. Australia, we're even luckier. You literally just go outside and you'll produce vitamin D. Why are we locking people inside? Yeah. Why are we putting them in front of a TV where they're going to sit and put on weight? And we're actually going to create the comorbidities which increase our risk. So I had all these kind of issues with what was going on. And again, once I started diving into COVID, obsessive compulsive, I had to find out everything. So I started looking into the statistics, the death rate, the treatments that were out there. And the more and more I found out, the more and more I just didn't understand why we were doing. I even I started looking into the vaccines. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. My child is fully vaccinated. During COVID, he was vaccinated. Again, and that's another thing that kind of got me into the politics. He was born 1 week into the first lockdown. So I lost the ability for my family to share that with me. My mother was in Canberra, so she couldn't come up. My sister was in a different area. Our LGA, we were all locked down. We weren't allowed you could only go a certain amount of places. You couldn't travel very far. So my family didn't see my child until it was almost 4 months. My sister and my mother even longer, 6 months, because once lockdowns got lifted, she was terrified by the fear that was being sold by the media. And she kept saying, oh, but COVID's in Sydney and everyone's dying. I'm like, no, Mum, they're not. Like, it just, like, a couple of people have got it. Oh, yeah, but, I'm old and they keep telling me I'm a high risk. And so she didn't come for ages. She ended up coming, and so that affected her. And then the second lockdown, when he's starting to socialize and needs to be around other children, we got not just lockdown, we got travel limits, not allowed to leave our LGA, curfews, all sorts of stuff. And then during that time, we had helicopters. Like, I live near the airport and I'm used to planes and helicopters. I saw the increase. I could see the difference in what was happening during that lockdown. They're sending helicopters over Western Sydney. I saw the police cars on the road. Like, Western Sydney compared to the rest, we just got hammered. Yeah. So, it's...
And people tend to forget that. It's like it wasn't too long ago that there was Western Sydney was completely shut down, on complete lockdown.
It was almost like a war zone.
Yeah, whilst Bondi is there going to the beach and enjoying themselves.
Not just Bondi, it's like northern beaches and North Sydney and all that. They were operating, like, obviously still some restrictions, social distancing, masks not until later. But yeah, you're right. They were pretty much living life and we're here shut down.
Yeah, with helicopters over their heads. There was videos of kids, showing the helicopters right over their heads. Well, 1 a.m., like over Woolworths.
We saw them landing in Auburn Park, like, and then
it was
it was
tough time for the area.
Crazy time. So, my business had been shut down. My son was affected. My ability for him to share it with my family, for his socializing. And so many other things. And then the government offered, like, COVID grant. Oh, even before that. So what happened was, before the first lockdown, I was getting ready to open up my UFC gym. So I had all my finance pre-approved, everything ready to go. It was a big dive in, but I'm a risk taker. I don't mind, putting things up. But what I wanted to do is keep my home and everything separate to the business. So I had business loans and then my home separate.
Yeah.
And then COVID hit. The gym was supposed to actually open before we actually got locked down, but because of reasons it didn't. So it got delayed. And then post-COVID, once we started operating, and then because I basically lost my original location. I found a better location. And then I got to the stage where I needed to get money. So I contacted the loan providers for my pre-approved loans. They're like, sorry, your industry's too great a risk. We might get shut down. And we've all pre-approved loans have been cancelled.
What?
So now I had to go out and reapply. And now there's no way that they were going to loan me the same amount of money. So thankfully I had a massive mortgage. So I had to remortgage my house to get enough money. And even then I still didn't have enough money to pay for it all. So I then had to go to these companies, and I literally have about somewhere between half a dozen to 10 different loans to try and finance everything with interest rates between 4 to 16%. Like, it's ridiculous. It's like, if I have to keep going this way, I don't know if I'm going to lose everything or not. But I'm a fighter. I'm not going to give up, and I'll keep pushing on. So I finally get all these things in place, and I open up my business, and we get shut down a week after I open. So now I've got to fight with the finance companies because I have no money to pay these loans now. So I had to fight with them to try and get, and it took a bit of effort, but they ended up being good and delaying my loans. But they don't stop the interest. Like, I don't have to make repayments, but they keep charging me interest, and then they bank it on to the end of the loan. There's no stopping. It's just, you're going to have to pay for it later. And then obviously the interest is making it higher, so the repayments are getting bigger.
Yeah.
So I have, that in place. And then I applied for all the New South Wales government grants and all this stuff. And because I've got the two businesses, I put in finances for both the businesses to try and I got my grants and all that stuff. And then a couple of months after COVID, we get opened up again. I get audited by the New South Wales government. I'm like, oh, well, I've done everything right. I have nothing to worry about.
Why did you get audited? Just a random audit?
Apparently, I have no idea. Yep, they didn't tell me why or anything. It's just I suddenly got audited. So I'm like, okay, I've done everything right. And they're like, oh, because my second business has no financial history, I don't get credit for it. So they're like, well, you've got to repay back half of it. And I'm like, and it was actually more than half. But I managed, the guy I was working with was actually pretty good, and he brought it down. I think I had to pay back $150,000. Now it's about $100,000 I've got to pay back. So I've got, on top of my loans that I have, I now have extra debt that I've got to pay back to the government, which was supposed to help me. So the government's announced the new COVID support loans, government guaranteed loans to help businesses that were impacted by COVID or started new businesses that started during COVID which need assistance. So I applied for it. I got denied because I have no financial history. And I'm like, well, how are you supposed to if you're a new business? And they're concerned that if there are further COVID restrictions, I may get shut down again and it may impact my ability to repay the loans. And I'm like, but that's the whole reason we're getting these loans.
Yeah.
And they're like, so I'm still fighting for that at the moment and this is what's crazy. I'm already servicing the loans. All I'm trying to do is combine it into a single loan with a lower interest rate to make repayments easier. And the COVID grant, the support loan, gives you a 12-month payment holiday. So that gives my business 12 months time to build up to a point. So it's easy to pay off the loans. But they don't consider any of that. They've just gone, we want 6 months of data, of financial data. And I'm like, I may not make that. And it's not because I can't, it's just because where I am at and what I've had to do to get that point has been really difficult. So, and then on top of that, my partner also lost her job because the vaccine mandates. And again, it's not because she's in a vaccine mandated business or industry. It's because the company she works for doesn't have any requirements, but they outsource, they work for they do events and stuff like that. And all the places, the event centers that bring them in require double vaccination certificate.
Yeah. And
we're trying to have another baby. And so I didn't feel it was worth the risk for her to be vaccinated.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't have had to be, but she lost her job. So more financial stress. So I got impacted in so many different ways. And with my gym as well, I talk to a lot of people, and there's a lot of people in my community who have been impacted the same way. And, I've been very vocal, and maybe that's why I got audited. I know that's why I got numerous police visits when we reopened in October, because there were people reporting the gym and me as an anti-vaxxer. And I'm like, no, I'm pro-freedom. I'm anti-mandate. I'm pro-bodily autonomy, which is not anti-vax, because, as I said, my child has been vaccinated I have all my vaccines. I just don't have this particular one. I should be able to choose that, though.
And now it's amazing that now the narrative is changing. But back then it was really, really, really harsh. I mean, me, I was doing this podcast. I had speakers on, and I had these speakers that were getting shut down from other platforms.
Yep.
And suddenly next minute I'm banned on Facebook for 47 years. They've given me a ban of 47 years.
Thankfully, I've been suspended several times on Facebook, but I've managed to get back on each time. So, yeah. But obviously there was a lot of different things. Police coming to my business, getting shut down, the government loans and subsidies, my partner, my son. There was a lot of reasons why I should do what I'm doing, and as I said, I was very vocal, probably why a lot of this is happening to me. But I'm not a complainer.
Yeah.
I'm a doer. And I just went, I don't want people to think of me as just a complainer. So you know what? I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. I'm going to get into the politics. I'm going to find a party that I believe can get us out of this. situation. So I looked at a lot of different parties. I looked at obviously United Australia Party, who I ended up going with. I looked at Australia One, who never actually registered a political party. I looked at One Nation, Liberal Democrats, and, you know, some of them were fantastic, like Lib Dems have some fantastic policies and stuff. But what drew me to United Australia was, for, first of all, Craig Kelly's member for Hughes, which is where my business is based. So Hughes, Fowler, and then I live in Blaxland, and that's the one I'm in. So it's my community. I'd already seen for years through social media, boosted posts, Craig's content coming through. Now, I always agreed with a lot of what he was saying, but I had this disconnect between what he was saying and the Liberal Party that he belonged to.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is great. You're saying this, but are you saying it because you believe it, or are you just trying to get votes because your party's not saying the same thing? They're almost opposite. So I kept watching him because, as I said, I liked what he was saying, but I couldn't. I mean, he wasn't in my electorate, so I couldn't vote for him directly, but I was always just kind of interested in seeing what's going on. And when the COVID stuff hit and he ended up separating from the Liberal Party, because I'm guessing he felt that same disconnect. He didn't feel like what his position, their position merged. And then when he joined the United Australia Party and they made him the leader, I straight away went and joined up as a member. At this point, I hadn't decided to be a candidate, but I kind of was looking at it and go, it's not really something I want to do. And then it just took a couple of months of just getting hammered. Like the old saying is, when a child has a hammer, everything's a nail.
Yeah.
The government only had a hammer. I was the nail, and I had enough of that. I wanted to be the hammer. So I applied to United Australia Party because I liked their policies. I liked their position. I trusted Craig because I felt he was being genuine to who he was before the pandemic hit. He didn't change his policies. He didn't swing to try and get vote. He kept honest with it. And with Clive has the financial backing to give us the opportunity. The problem with too many of the other parties is they don't have what they need behind them to really push and make it happen. I mean, we've got candidates in nearly every single seat in Australia. So we can win an election and we can form government because if we win enough seats.
Yeah.
Too many of the I don't want to call them minors because they're not minors, they're alternate parties. They're not independents, they're alternate parties. They can win seats and then they can still affect parliament. If they get enough seats, they can control votes and affect policy, but they can never form government. I mean, maybe if they created a coalition, possibly, but UAP can. And I believe
they have the numbers.
They have the numbers, and I believe they will because, as you said, the community's changing. They're seeing what's going on. I'm talking to the community. I have experienced what my community, so I understand what they're going through because I'm still going through it. I'm not out the other side. I'm still fighting my way through, and that's why, like, I'm running 2 businesses, I'm raising a child, and I'm still taking on this. I've just taken on a bigger workload, and this I'm going to link it back to the start of the story when I started MMA. So it was the same thing. When I was doing MMA, I was working a full-time job. I was doing part-time security. I was teaching at my own academy, trying to have a social life, but I made it work because I wanted it to. Back then, there was no such thing as MMA gyms. I had a wrestling membership at Sydney Olympic Park. I had a wrestling membership at Hornsby. It was a PCYC membership. I had a boxing membership at another PCYC. I had a kickboxing membership in Manly, close to where I live. I had a kickboxing membership in Parramatta, close to where I worked. I had a gym membership. I had probably half a dozen different memberships. And people was like, how could you afford that? I go, I found a way. I just did without something that wasn't necessary. I made it work. And I take that, and if it weren't for that fighting and that mindset. Like, as I said, at some points I was so deep in debt and I never thought I'd get out, but I fought my way out. So that's why I was willing to take on these loans that normally, you'd go, oh, I don't know if I want to put that. I don't care because I know I can get through anything. And it's the same with this upcoming election. I know I can get through anything, and I have the drive to succeed. I have the same experience of my community, so I can relate, and hopefully they can see that and will understand I don't want to do this. I really don't want to win the election to be a politician. I want to win the election because I want change. And the great thing is the people I've met, the other candidates that I've met are the same. They don't want to be politicians. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's a couple of people that enjoy and are driven by politics, and you need them. You need them. Without them, it's going to be very hard to run. It's the same thing. People go, oh, you shouldn't trust a lawyer. It's like, well, you need lawyers. They have the information. You need some of those guys on the team. The beauty of our team is we have people, we have lawyers, we have politicians, we have IT specialists, we have finance people, we have doctors, we have nurses, we have fitness industry people. We are real people from our community. We are for the people, by the people. And that's what it's all about. Kind of how I look at it.
And you're originally from Canberra. What were your thoughts on the Canberra protest?
Look, I think it was fantastic. It was great to see more and more people coming on board and really standing up. The great thing about the Canberra protest is it brought people from a lot of other states together.
Yeah.
We've already had some absolutely massive protests
Were you surprised by the size of it? I was surprised. I did not think that there was that many people that would go to Canberra. I don't think they've had that many people there.
I didn't think, Canberra's only 600,000 people. Yeah. So, I didn't expect those sort of numbers. I'd seen the massive numbers in Melbourne. Like, they've been some absolutely huge. Yeah. I saw at some points we had absolutely massive Sydney numbers. And I think—
which Channel 9 accused me of organising, absolutely didn't. But yeah.
And they really, but they didn't tell the story. Yeah, again, same thing, extreme right-wingers, anti-vaxxers, conspiracy theories. No, these were real people from our community who aren't happy with what's going on. And look, I have to admit, the Melbourne people didn't give up. They kept fighting through it, getting shot at with rubber bullets and all sorts of stuff, police brutality. They never gave up. Sydney got, I think, hammered a little bit, and they got frightened by the police presence for a little while there. I mean, a big part of it was, again, the campaign that they waged on Western Sydney, because I think a large proportion of the protesters came from Western Sydney. That's why they locked us down. That's why they gave us curfews. That's why they stopped us from leaving our LGAs, because Western Sydney is a community. It's not just people and houses. It's a massive community, and the way you break a community is you separate each other, and that's what they did with these policies. And I think it did break the cause for a little while, but we managed to regroup and come back strong. And now we're coming back stronger, and it was great to see that carried on into the Canberra protest. And again, it didn't get anywhere near the recognition that it deserved in the mainstream media. They still kind of selling it. They're a little bit fairer this time because I think the narrative's changing and they can't hide it. And I think we need to be careful because some of the news sources are now starting to swing their narrative. We still have to remember what they did. Exactly. And it's the same with the politicians. They're like easing restrictions, to make you feel better. What they do is they take everything away. Then they give you back less than they took away. Then they take it away again. Then they give you less than they gave back last time. Then they take it away. And it's a constant process to eventually you've got no rights and your freedoms are all gone and you've given it away because you haven't seen it coming. And this is what they're doing. If you even look at all the states that are easing restrictions have all extended their state of emergency. If we're easing restrictions, why are we extending our state of emergency? Shouldn't we, if we're easing, that means things are getting better. Should we not just end out? No, because they don't want to give up control.
Yeah.
They're easing things as we ease into an election. And I guarantee if they win, they're going to come back and more.
I couldn't agree more. I think we need to remember what has just happened coming into election. We can't, be sidelined by these gifts and thinking, that it's just calm, because there's always a wave,
These are not gifts. These are our rights. We deserve them.
Yes.
And again, too many people go, thank you. Oh, that's so good. They've, given. No. They're giving back what is ours. It's like a child takes a toy off you and it's my toy. All right, you can borrow it again. You can borrow my toy now. You can play with it, but I'm taking it back when you're finished. I've taken your toy. I'm giving it back to you, but I'm going to keep it. And that's what they're doing. That's what these things are. They've taken our freedom. They're giving it back to let us play with it, but they're going to keep it at the end if we don't stop them.
Yeah. I agree. And I know you got a meeting to get to, and I don't want to keep you any longer. I just want to quickly ask you, what's your top 5 fighters of all time?
Oh, look, there's a lot of great fighters out there. I mean, I'm sure it's the same as most top lists. Anderson Silva, absolutely love Anderson during his prime. George St. Pierre.
Fantastic.
Fedor Emelianenko.
Yes. I wish he ever fought in the UFC once. It would have been amazing, but
John Jones, even though I know he's a head case, he's an absolutely amazing athlete. The last one's a little harder. I mean, there's Mighty Mouse, who was just so dominant and broke so many records. And because he left and to go to one, I think he slipped the mind of just how dominant he was during his run. And it's a tough one. I love Khabib. I just think, he's undefeated. He left undefeated. I love his style, his constant pressure. He never gives up. He just pushes, and he forces his game. The only issue I have with Khabib is I think he left too early. He had a great legacy, but he got in there, defended once or twice, had some great performances. Obviously undefeated, but a lot of those fighters where he was undefeated weren't great fighters. Like, he was at that point where I really think he could have made a real stamp on what he's done. Don't get me wrong, he's absolutely amazing. And again, I find it hard to not put him in that top 5.
Yeah.
Because I'm such a big fan. That's where I struggle with. I'm a massive fan of how he fights. But it's not about how he fights. It's the achievements, the defenses, the guys that change weight divisions and win belts in different divisions, the guys that fight defense after defense, 11 defenses or whatever it was. He just doesn't have that extra edge to making him an all-time. And what is going to happen, I was going to say what I worry, and I'm like, no, it will happen. There are going to be fighters that come after him who achieve that and then more. And so, and I really think he could have been the all-time great if he just, another half a dozen fights or so, maybe a little bit more, maybe go up a weight division, pick up a belt there. He could really cement his place. He'll always have a place in history, don't get me wrong. Absolutely amazing. But looking at the greatest of the great, it's tough, not because of his skills, but his achievements. I kind of hope, I really hope Oliveira keeps winning, because I think if he loses, then Khabib's like,
done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know he says he's done, but I think if Oliveira, beats Gaethje, and then is it Makhachev, I think?
Keeps going. Yeah.
If he beats him and then he wins a couple more, Khabib's got to sit back and go, maybe I left too early.
because he was going to come back if Conor had won. That was sort of the play around that was happening at the time.
I know at one point he was considering if GSP came back, and then GSP said he would for a fight, and then
I think they're doing a grappling match.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, apparently a grappling match between those two. They're saying that in the works.
That I would watch. That'll be interesting.
I
mean, look, honestly, most MMA grapplers like super dominant in the cage, but when it gets onto the mat, it's a different game.
Yeah, like Cowboy Cerrone. Sort of.
Yeah. And I know Khabib has trained in the Danaher dungeon.
Yeah.
And he wasn't dominant the way he is in the MMA cage.
Oh, he trained in there. I know GSP trains there.
Oh, GSP does. He went in there. I've heard it was like, I think it's just a single, maybe 1 or 2 sessions or something. He's done some work there. Yeah. And it wasn't as dominant as he is in MMA.
Interesting. Spices things up.
And obviously, as you said, GSP trains with them. He trains in the Danaher system. Again, I don't know how good the GSP is in that system again. And it then creates the interesting clash of they're both top players.
Yeah.
So this is one of the things that I think too many fighters have made the mistake with fighting Khabib. And they keep doing what Khabib is good at countering. Like they work sprawl and ball, they work their striking, they work on getting back up to their feet. That's what he's good at stopping. And I was saying Gaethje's only game plan that he's going to threaten Khabib is if he goes back to his roots, because Gaethje's a great wrestler. When he was in the I can't remember what it's just the WFA, I think it was, before he came to the UFC. He used to wrestle, used to do big slams, ground and pound, crush people on the ground, and he switched to a more exciting style. Now, great for the fans, turned into his striking went through the roof, and he used his wrestling to defend. The problem is that's not going to work against Khabib, and it didn't. Yeah. I really feel he could have created a greater threat. I don't know how much of a greater threat, but I think he would have been a greater threat is if instead of defending takedowns,
he went for it.
He initiated takedowns. I think if he was striking in and then coming underneath and trying to take him down, man, and I think that's what needed to happen.
Yeah.
And
then he got caught in a triangle. What a way for Khabib to sort of finish it off.
Yeah, well, but still, but it was still from the mount though. Like he switched it, and because he tried that triangle armbar, which is one of my moves, and I could have fixed it so he would have won in the first round, but remember it's arm bars.
And I'll finish it. I've given you the top 5, which is an extremely tough one to hit.
Sorry, before you switch to that, the point I was just going to make is they're both top players, so whoever puts the other one on their back first is probably going to win.
Beautiful. Elvis, do you want to let them know where they can find you? For everyone, I haven't had political figures in ever since I interviewed Robert Malone. Had a lot of requests. Particular parties that you've mentioned have reached out a lot, and I've sort of stayed away from the politics as much as I can. But Lucky
I've got an interesting backstory, huh?
Yeah. You've got a backstory that I truly respect, and you've done achievements that I truly respect, not only as achievements in itself, but achievements that build incredible character. And that's the main reason that, I would back you. And I think you'll do great in your community if you end up winning, which I hope that you do. And just let them know where they can find you, and when the dates are. It's March. It's coming up. Is it
the election?
Yeah,
May. So
May.
It's originally they were saying May 21, but I think it's more likely going to be May 14th, which is being floated at the moment. For those people that know me will know I genuinely want to help.
Yeah.
I mean, everything I've done over the years is about helping people. I get great joy in seeing people help. Like, I have affiliates. I don't charge an affiliate fee for any of my old students. I give them business and teaching advice and all that sort of, because I just want to see them succeed. You can reach higher levels of success by helping those up underneath you than standing on top of them. And that's kind of how I do things. I've always wanted to help not just my friends and family, but my community. And I'm hoping that the people of Blaxland, my electorate, can see that. And again, very similar to the other candidates here, I'm easy to find. You literally just have to type Elvis UFC and I will pop up. I've got Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. I've got all those platforms. You can look up me through UAP Blaxland. I've got a UAP Blaxland Facebook page. I can be contacted at UAP Blaxland at unitedaustraliaparty.org.au. As I said, very easy. Or you can look up King's Academy. You can find me through there. I'm probably one of the easiest candidates to find, just because my name is so unique, and it's probably the reason I got into fighting, because as a kid I was picked on a lot. So, and thankfully I'm good at fighting. Not just, no, I don't mean just physically, but I have a fighting spirit, because I know I'm gonna need this for the election.
Yeah.
And most importantly, before I finish off, I always want to say it's good to be the king.
I love it. Elvis, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Thank you.